Hey there, Terrace CRC. It's my second last video, at least in terms of what's planned. I do know that I plan next week to make a video of just reminiscing about some of what I've seen and experienced here, and certainly things that the council seems to have appreciated hearing, uh, because there seems to be an awareness that every now and then an experienced outside perspective is a good thing to hear. And so I have a list of things that I've shared over my time at various council meetings and things, and I'll share some of those in my last planned video. What I want to do today is I want to think out loud a little bit about something that I think of as attributing motive. In Genesis 3, a passage I like to return to every now and then and ponder anew what the Almighty can do, is the whole idea of knowing good and evil, having your eyes opened and knowing good and evil, because that's what's talked about there in what we call the fall, all that stuff about the forbidden fruit. And I have come towards a few conclusions that if we believe we get to a point where we actually know good and evil, it's a good sign we've probably eaten of the forbidden fruit. In the rest of Scripture, of course, there's a different kind of fruit that we are to bear, and these are behavioral ones, not intellectual ones, and that's just worth comparing, worth thinking about. What fruit are we encouraged to bear and to participate in, and what fruit are we not? And so it has struck me for a long time that when the forbidden fruit was consumed, whatever it was, I know we like to depict it as fruit from a tree, but I think it could be have a broader meaning than that. And I know and get quite annoyed with the Victorian notion that it is something sexual, a notion that persists, uh, probably entered into the story because of the lack of clothing of Adam and Eve. But that's not what I'm trying to talk about today. Stay on topic, Pete. Attributing motive is a form of knowing good and evil. So when I am experiencing someone else's behavior, someone else in conversation, and I am drawing conclusions in my mind of what their motivations are, what their motivations actually are in their behavior, I'm in dangerous territory, is what I've learned. Now, I spend a lot of time in dangerous territory, and I don't. It's a tough one to shake. I've learned that to some degree, and especially if you live in a chaotic environment or an environment where there are people that are less predictable than most of us would like, less stable in that predictability sense. In other words, if there are people that have power and can create trauma for you, I've learned that that changes. In fact, it becomes a survival skill to understand people's motives. I know of a lady who had an abusive father, and I actually have heard multiple versions of this story, some of them when I was working in addiction treatment, where they will say something like, when dad came home from work, you had to look at him. I could look at him and know immediately what was coming. The look on his face would tell me we were going to get this and that. So, this and that negative thing. And so it was a survival skill, because people that have to do that can do things to try and attenuate or lessen the um, unrelated to anything else consequences that are generally only related to the mood of the person delivering them, not to any wrongdoing, maybe to perceived wrongdoing. But so can become a survival skill, and there are times when it's important. I had an experience where I was sitting in the back seat of a car where we were in a tourist area, and we had the windows open, and um, suddenly from 4 different directions, 4 people came rushing at the car, and uh, I thought maybe they recognized one of the 4 of us in the car and wanted to talk, but it was a hostile moment. Let's just put it that way, triggered by the driver hanging his arm out the window and just feeling the breeze. But we drove by a lady in one of those bikinis that had a top that had a tie that was tied. And so our that arm out was interpreted as an attempt to untie that bikini top, and hostility came out of it. But I was on the opposite side of the car. I hadn't seen that happen. So what I'm saying is there are times when it is worth knowing, you know what, their motives probably aren't good, uh, aside from any past trauma or anything like that. So caution is valuable. But you and I have both known or been a person who takes an approach to life where they think they know everyone's motives, and they will readily share with you how terrible the other person's motives are. And then uh, they can feel somewhat powerful in that, right? And you might even be impressed. But I'm here to say today that that's a very, very dangerous activity that needs to be handled carefully if you're going to do it, and that we need to all be very cautious about having. The reason being, what it creates when it's out of hand is the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel was all about messing up communication, probably languages, but just messing up people's ability to communicate, even if they use the same language, by everyone having negative interpretations of the motives of the other. And so if you are living an existence where you attribute negative motives to what everyone does, I'll give you an example. I was once riding, this is years ago, the SkyTrain in Vancouver, and I was near a person who had met an old acquaintance on the train, so they were kind of catching up. And this person had a litany that went something like this: my ex is after me, the government is after me, the police are after me, blah 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 blah. You know, and then I next expected that him to point to me and saying, I think this guy's after me too, right? So that's an attributing of motive, and then there's, in that situation, likely something else going on. But it's dangerous. It's a dangerous way to be, because you end up alienating yourself, especially if you do it with God, right? If you attribute mean and nasty motives to God, that God is doing something negative to you in your life, it's not going to help you build a relationship with God. Well, the same with people. So I have, over time, become, as best I can, cautious myself about saying this is why so and so did that, either in my head or even out loud to anyone else. And I've come to recognize that that's just a dangerous pattern that can exist in a community. Now, this is just a topic I'm picking off of a list. I'm not picking it because I know it to be a problem in Terrace. It's just a possible challenge that we should be aware of. And so the journey then becomes learning to let go and let God, learning to, I think it's good to retain a certain amount of caution, but to be careful about deciding why someone is doing something, particularly if it's in relationship to you, because you really can't know. And I've had a few occasions when I have an idea like that and I end up in a situation where I'm able to have a conversation with the person. I thought you were doing that because, and they go no, it was for the good of the team, or whatever the reason was. And I start to recognize how off base I can get in my attributing, deciding what someone else's motives are. That's my thought for this week. Just what I've been trying to do in these is various, I guess they're sort of life learning things. They're not, and I've been a bit cautious about tying them to texts because, as you know by now, I'm more about the power of the Bible as story rather than proof texts, so I just don't lean in that direction very much, although I mentioned two Bible situations in this one in a glancing way, in a context-giving way. Like I said, next video will be kind of a wrap and a review, and I'll take it from there. By the way, I made the trip out to Prince Rupert yesterday and really enjoyed that. Saw some of the sights, and as always, had my camera with me. I can't remember if I've mentioned this, but when I have my camera with me in British Columbia, my main theme, although capturing pictures of birds is becoming a bigger one now lately, but my main theme has been getting pictures of trees growing out of stumps. And of course there's a lot of that around here, so I got a few of those for my collection. But I also have learned that I have an eye for patterns and for the unusual, for something just different. So what I think I'll do is I'll share in the notes for this video on YouTube, I'll just share a link to a blog that I have where I share some of those pictures. It's very hard to take like 50 pictures in a day and then just decide to share 10. Because often there's a story with every picture. So, but I'll just do that so that you can see what I do kind of as a hobby. Till next week, keep learning, keep living.